Let us start. Our topic today is shared repository parameter. For shared repository parameter, prerequisite is should know what is shared repository and how to configure shared repository to the existing action. These two are mandatory for shared repository parameter. Previous session we have seen what is shared repository and how to bind shared repository in to the script. Shared repository is created using Object Repository Manager. Object Repository Manager allows you to create shared repository. When we create shared repository, we do it at the parent level. All the child objects mapping directly to that parent are recognized and transferred to the repository. You have multiple options in shared repository. One is the selected object or default object types, all object types, or you can customize the objects that you want to add to the repository. Once that is done, you need to save that object, the entire repository, using the save icon. Once you save it, the file extension used for shared repository is .tsr. You can save it in any location. Once that is done, you need to map that shared repository to your existing script. To map it, there are two ways. One, you have to go to resources, object repository. Initially you can see that the repository is not mapped. To map the repository, we need to go to resources, associate repositories. This is one way of mapping it. Another way of mapping it is click on action, right click, action properties. Under this action properties, you have associated repositories. So this is the way you map shared repository to the actions. You cannot remove local repository. You have to have shared repository mapped before you start recording the actions. This is what shared repository is. This is prerequisite for shared repository parameter. Shared repository parameter is another way to manage dynamic object. So in our case, I like to create one more shared repository. I am opening the application. I need one more repository for my facts table. I'll create that repository as a shared repository. Then we will see how to manage dynamic objects through repository parameter. I have inserted the order. I am faxing this order. In this fax order, this child objects of this fax order number 151 dialog is not yet added to my shared repository. I am adding that repository. So to go to resources, object repository manager, I have opened the screen. Add object, add objects. Once I click on add, I'll get the hand symbol. place it at the top level window. I'm adding now the object dialog fax order number 151. You can see an object selection screen. Under this object selection screen, once I click OK, I have options to choose the child objects. Is it all objects? Is it selected object or default object or a custom object type? Since I am not aware of what other users uses the repository, I am clicking it on all object types. So all child objects are now added to this repository. Please note that dialog is same, that fax order number 151 is still the component of text property. You can notice once the repository is loaded to the screen, you can notice to the right object properties, description properties. Under that, now I have selected fax order number 151. Under this fax order number, the text property is now still same. I save this file into our repository folder. I make it as fax title. TSR is the, or I'll say fax dialog. TSR is the default extension. I am now save the file. Once I save this file, I want this file to be used. Exist. I am finished my repository. I came out. I need to map both the repositories to my test, new test. This time I'll do it through object action repository, associate repository through resources. I'm adding both the repository now. I can do it one at a time. I'm doing it now. I've mapped, but still not mapped to the action. I'm mapping each repository I need to map to the action. I'm selecting the action in the available action, right? I'm doing it for each of the repository. So for each repository, I map to the action. Now you can see repository 1 is mapped, repository 2 is also mapped. I say OK. After mapping, we need to start our record. I'll start my recording. Windows, I'm starting my recording. Base state, I brought the base state before I start my recording. Clicked on start record. I'm recording now. As I move into now when I create a new order, you can see that order number that creates is 152, whereas the repository that we have added is for 151. You might have noticed as we move along. So now you can watch the insert order is 152. Now I am going to go to fax this order. When I fax this order, the dialog that you notice is 152. It is not 151. We have added to the repository fax order number dialog dot 151. Whereas when I record, I am recording now with 152. This is for your information. Sending the fax. After I send base state, I stop my recording. So after I finish my recording, if I go back to resources, go to object repository, I went back to resources, I clicked on object repository. As I click object repository, you can see now fax order number 151 is disabled, that is non-editable mode, and there is one more object added called fax order number 52. Fax order number 52 is the one which we have recorded and that has got added to the local repository, because the logical name or the description properties of 152 is different object compared to 151. Due to this, when we record, the QTP added this object to the repository. For our management of shared repository parameter, as per my framework, I am not supposed to have any object in my local repository. Since I should not have a repository to the local, I am removing this fax order number 52. The entire object I am removing from the local repository now. If I delete it, you can notice now in our keyword view, against this object dialog 152, you will notice a question mark. Before I delete, I'll go back to my keyword view. In keyword view, you notice now all the objects are binded without any issues. So 152 is binded. You can see that the object is binded. Now I come to repository. I am going to remove this 152 from local repository because my automation framework says I am not supposed to maintain a local repository. I remove it now. I select that object, right click, delete. As I delete now from the repository, I have now deleted. I save this file. Now I bring back to the keyword view. You can see now the fax order number 152 is mapped as a question mark. The question mark indicates this object is not available in the repository. I want this object to be mapped to already recorded object, that is 151. I am doing all this to ensure that we are not using local repository. Is it mandatory to do? It is not. In your reality, if your application is really behaving in the way it is supposed to behave, then you may have only one object. I am now mapping 150 instead of 152, I am mapping it to 151. So he says new object for this step will delete all the sub steps displayed under the replaced object. I don't want, no. So if I map it from keyword view, this is the warning message that appears because I need those child objects. So that means the fax number sent, all this I need. To better way to do is, instead of here in the expert view, come to the expert view. In the expert view, replace 2 with 1. It ends. So automatically we are mapping the logical name. The sub objects are not removed now. So you can see that the objects now are intact as I move to the keyword view. You can now see it. We all know when we run, it will not work because of the dynamic object. Current order number that it will generate is 153. But I cannot directly change to regular expression here because this is non-editable mode. You can see that it is in read-only mode. So for this purpose, QTP has given an option called shared repository parameter. First, I am now saving this script. I go to resources, I open my repository. I go to resources, I go to object repository manager. I am into object repository manager now. So it is now object repository manager. Under this object repository manager, I am now trying to open the already recorded object. I am selecting open. I click on open. In this open, I am choosing now this facts dialog. I click on open now. I have chosen the facts dialog. Under this facts dialog, I am now trying to access under this facts order number. What I like to do is I like to map this fax order number to our shared repository. That is, this fax order number text property, I like to map it to shared repository parameter. So to do that, what I am trying to now do is I go to tools. Now, this fax order number 151, we know the text property is the one which we like to manage, and this text property right now, if you see, it is in the read only mode. You can see now there is a option in the top, there is a menu or information that it is in read only mode in the top of object repository manager title. First, since shared repository is used by many users, he ensures that there is no accidental change to the repository. That is why by default he opens it in the read only mode. I have an option here called enable editing. When I click on enable editing, the current repository that we are having now, it will now enable. Now you can see that it has become now normal mode, editable mode. And once the object is in editable mode, first is I need to create a parameter, and then I need to map that parameter to the property that we feel dynamic. So I go to tools, I choose tools, I go to manage repository parameter. As I click manage repository parameter, I have manage repository parameter window. I select add, I click on plus symbol. I am giving now parameter name. It is shared repository SR. It is always an input parameter. So parameter underscore fax title. I don't have a default value because I'm sure this value will not work for the next run. I am now created a parameter. I click OK. I choose OK. Now that parameter I need to map it to the repository. I have created a parameter. Now that parameter I need to map it to the repository, that is fax order number 151. This text property I like to replace it with the parameter. Please note that parameter still doesn't have a value because the value needs to be arrived only through the runtime script. I click on configure value to the right. You can see that there is a configure value button. I click on configure value. You will see a repository parameter window. In that repository parameter, I click on parameter. You can now see that SR underscore P underscore fax title has come. All the parameters that we created appears over here. I say now OK. Now we have our parameter created, then map the parameter to the repository. So I'll review this, or we just see what we have done as of now. First I opened the repository, shared repository, for which we need to map the shared repository parameter, and I clicked on enable editing so that I can modify my repository values. Went to tools, selected manage repository parameter window. In this manage repository parameter window, I have created parameter. I can create any number of parameter as I like. These parameters, if you know there is a default value that you can assign this value. And all these parameters, now I need to map it to the repository. So to map it to the repository, identify the object which has a dynamic property, choose the object, come to the description properties, select the property that is dynamic, choose configure value button from the value icon, click on configure value button. You can see that repository parameter window opens up. In that, I choose the parameter that I want to map to this property. I click on OK. Please note, this parameter doesn't have a value as of now. I click on save button. I saved it. I click on file, close it.